Laura, thanks for being here today. We're going to do a question and answer style podcast, but before we get started, we'll just do a check-in with you to see what's going on in your life.
Not much. I'm just getting adjusted to training and coaching at Tiger Fitness in Cincinnati, sort of north of Cincinnati. So that's been about 3 months now. So we're definitely adjusted to that, and the team is adjusted and having a ton of fun there. Summer is kind of a slow time for me as far as like doing any seminars. I just did one recently, but I don't, summer's kind of hot, so I just had to take that off. But getting ready to get ready for the North of the Border that we're hosting in November, and then starting to prep for getting everything set for the Women's Pro-Am in April. So that's kind of what's going on this summer.
Is your gym public or private?
It's public in a way. That Tiger Fitness is a supplement company, so they promote it through the week, Monday through Friday. It's free to the public. So Monday through Friday from 8 to 6, anybody can come in and train for free. So that's pretty cool. And then my athletes that train powerlifters and whatnot have access 24 hours to it. So it is a public gym in some sense, but also private in another sense, as far as, like full access to the gym. But yeah.
How much work goes into putting on a meet?
It's a lot. It's definitely a lot. And I've been hosting meets now for more than 10 years. And every time I do it, every year I'm like, this is going to be my last year. This is going to be my last year. I'm going to pass it off to somebody else or just retire from it. Because every time, especially probably the month leading up to it, there's just so much additional work. My life is already busy enough as it is. Yeah. And then if you add on the preparations for a meet, I'm always just like, oh my gosh. But then once the meet happens, I'm literally like, this is so fun. This is so awesome. You see everybody get to benefit from it and have a really good experience. So then I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it again, so it's a ton of work that people don't realize, to host a meet that's good, and lifter friendly.
In your opinion, what's the difference between a bad meet and a good meet?
A bad meet would be just a meet director that doesn't pay attention to the details, the things that the lifters need, as far as the environment, the equipment in the warm up room, different things like that. And then just the way the meet is run on meet day. So, do you run a clock? A lot of people might get upset about the 1 minute time clock, but it really keeps the meet moving quickly and it benefits the lifter. It's not about let's try to get out of here as quickly as possible. It's more about making sure that you as a lifter aren't sitting there in your wraps for too long because someone that's going ahead of you is taking 3 minutes to get up to the platform. It just makes things run efficiently, and it makes it so that you don't squat, let's say at 9 a.m. and then have to deadlift at 7 p.m. or something like that. No one likes to do that. So little things like that. And then having good judging that's consistent and fair, so making sure that you're bringing in the right judges, just little details like that make it a good meet compared to, not so much. But, the Women's Pro-Am, for example, is a great meet. And I have to attribute that just to the women that come, the lifters that come and make that atmosphere the way it is, and make it such a well-known thing. So lifters themselves can make or break a meet, as far as just the effort and camaraderie that they put into it.
What are the things that you've learned going on? Because it's always interests me going to meets, because as you said, you can go to meets and nothing is prepared. You just turn up and hope for the best. But when you first started to now, what are some of the things, I wish I did at the start?
As far as a meet director or
as meet director?
Oh man. I mean, early on, I'd say a lot of the things are the same. Things have just improved as far as little things as having a screen so that the lifters can see where they're at in the order, things like that, instead of having to sit and just listen to the announcer, or having more equipment in the warm-up room for the lifters. I'd say back in the day, I went to a lot of the top meets, so I was going to the Power Station Pro-Am and the WPO and all these meets that had the best of the best at the time. So luckily, I had my own experiences with that to be able to start off really well. It's just over the years, it's just grown into like I said, better technology,
Yeah.
like having the screen for the lifters, having the the light system that is cordless, so there's not cords laying all over the
Yeah.
ground, um, better venues, having like big open space. The first women's program we had was in the sweatshop that was just the one side. So that's maybe 3,000 square feet of open room. And, so we had to like really, the warm up room was so tiny, but it was still a great meet though.
Yeah.
I remember some of the Westside. I remember Josh Connolly saying like that was one of the coolest meets I've ever been to. And not because it was like, oh, this venue is so huge and so nice or all this stuff. It was just because of the atmosphere and the lifters and how into it they got. So like I said, like even though it was like not an ideal or like a beautiful space and, all the top equipment, it still was a great meet. So the only thing that's really changed is this better technology.
Then how do you select good judges? Because this is always a big topic for squat, especially is the most
I
judged
know.
lift out of them all.
Yeah,
I always found it's very hard to blame the lifter over the judges.
for
But
sure.
from a meet
Yeah.
director point of view, how do you try to ensure that the best people are in the place?
You know, you just kind of now with the popularity of social media, you can kind of see online like different meets that are happening, and you start to realize like this federation, like what I'm seeing is, not a great meets, great judges that is consistent and fair. Um, and then the federation that we had been using like started to just kind of there wasn't much structure to it.
Yeah.
Like, you want judging and meets that are lifter friendly and that the lifters have fun with, but you also want it to be legitimate,
Yeah.
and be something that people respect and take seriously. So you just kind of like observe like what meets are happening and what's being put out there. And then we made a decision that to go back to the APF. Like that's what I had started with when I was first got into powerlifting. Everybody lifted in the APF. Like I remember going to senior nationals and that was like it was like the world championships. Like all the top lifters were there at that meet because there weren't 50 different federations.
Yeah.
So it was really nice. And they were very structured and organized and fair. So we kind of made this decision to go back to that. And mostly for me, it was because I really want to, obviously give access to everybody as far as raw lifting, single ply, multiply, but I really wanted a federation that advocates for multiply lifting.
Yeah.
So the APF was kind of where we decided to go because they really advocate for that. And then they're very structured without being too much. Some federations are a little bit much as far as their rules and regulations and whatnot. But the APF seemed to be this good balance of everything. And I knew that like one of the main guys that kind of judges everywhere and hosts a lot of the meets was Eric Stone. And the first meet I ever did in 2005 was his meet.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy that things have kind of come full circle. But Eric's really good, very organized, but does a really great rules briefing and is just a good resource for the rules. Because I think sometimes you go to meets and I remember back in the day, like, certain federations, I'd be like, this person is sitting in the chair. I don't even think they're certified. And I don't think they really actually know the rules. Like, I don't know if they know what technically in the rule book is parallel and breaking parallel, So me wanting to kind of help keep multiply alive and grow it back, I was like, one thing that'll help is making sure that, the squat depth is good. It's not like burying people, but it's legitimate and that people are seeing, oh, like a raw lifter that has no experience with multiply could look at it and say, that's totally respectable. And not, instead of looking at it like, what a joke, So that was kind of important to me to have good judges so that we could help legitimize and multiply lifting and sort of attract some of the raw lifters that, might look at it and say like, I want to try that.
Is that hard to balance the raw and multiply in one meet? Is it hard to get the sequence correct?
It's been actually pretty good because if you look, I mean, most of our meets, I'd say are you know, if you look at multiply and raw, like overall, like
Hmm.
in the United States or something, like I'm not sure exactly what the percentages are, but it is more raw lifters. But when we have meets, I would say it's almost the other way. We were, it's where it's like 50-50
Yeah.
almost. We have a ton of multiply lifters that come to the meets just because I think people know like this is a meet that's going to be lifter friendly. And I'm not going to go to this meet where I'm one of the only like maybe 3 lifters that are multiply. So they're fearful of that because
Yeah.
if those judges are looking at these raw lifters all day that are just going ass to grass, and then they come up with their equipment on and just barely break parallel, which is all you need to do.
Yeah.
They know that if they come to one of our meets that it's going to be pretty well blended, so that they're going to have a better chance that those judges are going to know what they're looking for.
Yeah. It's a hell of an interesting area to get into, especially from someone who's lifted to get into running meets. Was it hard at the time when you started being a competitor and a meet director?
Yeah, it was. I would say I think I started hosting meets. It was just bench press meets, so that
Okay.
was like pretty easy. Back in 2010, I
Yeah.
believe, and
They were in July, right? Weren't they?
yeah, they were
Yeah.
in the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, bench press meets are really fun to host, like
Yeah.
because it's the squat that really makes everything stressful as a lifter and as a meet director.
Yeah.
So take that out of it, and hosting, it's pretty fun. So it didn't really affect my training. It was just once a year.
Yeah.
And then 2012 is when we started having the pro-am. So that was like the last couple years of my like competitive lifting career that I started hosting like big meets.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that if that mixed with coaching more, mixed with traveling to teach the seminars for Louis and stuff, that's when I never really intended to retire,
Yeah.
but I had all these other things going on that were interesting me, and that I started finding passion in. And it was just seemed like a logical step to say, like, this is what I want to focus on now. And, I was pretty well satisfied with what I did. You could always say, I
Yeah.
wish I would have done more, but hosting the meets and teaching the seminars and doing in coaching just seemed like more of a passion to me, and where my focus was, it was taking a lot out of me for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To segue from that into coaching, I wanted to talk with you about GPP because it seems to be a pretty misunderstood area of training, especially for powerlifters. And we'll go into other sports afterwards. But in your opinion, what role does GPP play for a powerlifter?
It's more important than people think, because GPP, like for a different athlete, like football, basketball, whatever, what we do, especially with a conjugate power lifter, that's their GPP, like they're like doing the barbell movements and special exercises. That's what they need for general physical preparedness, where that is our sport and our specialty. Like you know, other athletes are so specialized that they need this as their GPP. Whereas powerlifters, if your training system is right, where you're doing a blend of the barbell movements, the compound movements plus special exercises, what would GPP be to a powerlifter? And that would be more of a focus on the aspect of GPP that is like conditioning, anaerobic, aerobic, mobility, things like that I think people totally overlook. And I wouldn't say that I have a whole lot of regrets for powerlifting at all. I'm happy everything went the way
Yeah.
it did, but I do wish I would have focused more on that aspect of GPP, sled dragging, like not being afraid to do like conditioning, like bike sprints, or, just being more well-rounded. I wish I would have been in better condition, because since my retirement from powerlifting, I focus a lot on conditioning. And when I had retained a lot of my strength after I retired from powerlifting and was doing more of the conditioning, I found that I felt better as an athlete. I was retaining my strength, but also felt more conditioned. And I think, I always think back, I'm like, would my deadlift have been better? Because that's the one lift that I had that I wish I would have been able to show what I was capable of, and
Yeah.
I didn't. And it was like, okay, well, why not? And I think it was just because it was the end of the meet. I was fatigued and I just wasn't in shape. I was in shape lifting wise, but I wish I would have been in better condition. So I think that that's one aspect that power lifters can often take for granted is being a better athlete as far as GPP goes, making sure they're doing, different aspects of GPP, sled dragging
Yeah.
or prowler or, you know, different bike sprints, rowing. I mean, like different things like that. I'm not saying like to go do a long CrossFit WOD or
Yeah.
something like that, but making sure that, and that's one thing that with the Westside conjugate system that I'm so passionate about teaching to people, especially like raw lifters, equipped lifters, is that the system is laid out to have so much of that, like all built in, the
Yeah.
recovery aspects, with the the special exercise days that we do, the small workouts that are just, those are meant for recovery and injury prevention or injury, recovery. Everything's built in as far as the repetition method, everything's built into this 1 week so that there's no need for like deload weeks and
Yeah.
things like that. So, what's nice about that is that it's sort of built in, but one thing that's I think is missing that a power lifter needs to take it upon themselves to do is more like conditioning and mobility. But mobility not meaning like to sit in static stretch for,
Yeah.
long periods of time,
Yeah.
but being more mobile, especially with the wide stance with equipped lifting and things like that, that it's super important.
Were you surprised of when you stepped back from competing and worked on conditioning, the improvement of the quality of your life and how you didn't lose any strength?
Oh, absolutely. I was just like blown away by how I had just had this misconception in my own mind. Nobody, told me this, but like that if I did anything extra, aside from my main strength training workouts, that would affect me negatively. Whereas like it would just have helped build a bigger work capacity.
Yeah.
So I think people are, I don't know, they start to feel fatigued from a workout and they think I should do less. Oh man, I'm really beat up. Where it's like Louis is a prime example of needing to do more,
Yeah.
having a bigger work capacity and adding more tools to your toolbox. So doing more things, doing, a hike or like, anything like that, just to make sure that you're not so specialized,
Yeah. How important is training density for GPP? Trying to fit in as much as you can in a certain time frame. To give you an example, there's people who can get everything done in speed day in an hour, 15 minutes. Then there's other people who take 3 hours.
Yeah.
How important is that to performance?
That's one aspect of GPP. Like, so if someone wanted to improve their GPP, I always tell them start to, condense your training times. I'm not saying like right off the bat, like go from 3 hours to 1 hour, but start to, and so like if I have like clients I'm actually coaching, like if I have a personal training client or something, because I have a lot of personal training clients that I do the conjugate system with.
Yeah.
So for example, I'll have like on dynamic lower day, like we're on a timer, they have to be under the bar, picking the bar up on, let's say a speed squat in every 45 seconds. So they'll get through a 10 doubles in 6 minutes and 50 seconds, so, and that's with the proper weight that they're supposed to use. But it took time to build up to that level of conditioning. Then right over to the deadlift and doing the same thing every, 30 to 45 seconds doing speed sets. So they're getting done with both things, the speed squats, speed pulls in 15 minutes. And that leaves them 45 minutes plus to do the accessory work, which is more than enough. So really it's just a matter of planning and discipline. So a lot of times people go into a workout and they have no plan as far as whether it's max effort or dynamic effort. They have no real plan. So that they're just kind of like, what weight do I need? And so there's all this, counting, or they get into groups that are too big.
Yeah.
And then no matter how fast you go, your rest period then is going to be 3, 4, 5 minutes between your speed squats. Whereas it would benefit someone more or benefit the group more to split up into 2 groups, maybe even if one group is helping the group, because there's weight changes, if you're using a monolift, there's height changes and things like that. So splitting up into groups would be more beneficial to everyone. And then switching off that way. But I can't stress enough the importance of the time frame of your workouts. So we're talking, that's, speed day, that's going to help your conditioning as far as keeping those rest periods short. But even on max effort day, going into the workout with a plan, I talk about this a lot of times in the seminars is, a lot of times people go into a workout, with a conjugate system, there's so many variations. You might not do that variation for months and months and months. So that's why it's ideal to log your workouts so that you can look back and say, what did I do on this variation? And that way you have a plan to go, like a plan for that training session, instead of just like throw one plate in the bar, plate, quarter, plate, quarter, plate, quarter. And next thing you know, you're doing 10 to 15 total sets to get up to a max, instead of being able to plan it out to where you're doing 7 or 8 or at most 9 total sets to get up to that 1 rep max. That makes a huge difference. I could, adding 3 or 4 sets to that could, add another 15, 20 minutes to your workout. So when it comes to volume, that's incredibly important to have a plan so you're not doing too much volume on max effort day, and, hitting those 3 attempts at or above 90%, and then shut it down and you move on to accessory work. But too many times people place so much emphasis on hitting that 1 rep max that they'll spend an hour getting up to the 1 rep max. Yeah. And next thing you know, they have no time, or at that point, no energy mentally or physically to put into their accessory work, which is the more important aspect of the training session. So it's just a matter of planning and discipline, and, just being in shape enough to handle those rest periods. So I always tell people, use a timer, literally use a timer, because you'd be so surprised at how much time, wasted time you're spending in between sets or doing too many sets. But I think one of the best ways to improve your GPP is on especially dynamic lower days. I mean, I think mostly because I did that video with Louis for the combine years ago. And I remember being like, this will be no problem because I don't rest very long between my speed sets. Apparently I did, because when we were on a timer like that, now granted that timer was every 20 seconds, but going immediately from doing the 10 doubles right over to the platform to do the doubles on speed work, I'd never done anything so hard ever. Like it felt like, I wasn't doing conditioning at the time, but it felt like I had just done like the hardest CrossFit WOD. And I was like, oh, okay, so this makes sense. This is how I can get in better shape without doing any extra, a ton of extra conditioning or cardio or whatever, so that's one of the most important days in doing it that way.
Do you have an amount of people per group you find optimal?
I'd say no more than 3. 2 would be ideal, because if you're trying to keep it, I'd say, like I always tell people, like the most that should be is like an EMOM, like every minute on the minute is when you should go. But like 45 seconds would be ideal. And really, even with every minute on the minute, that only really leaves time for maybe one other person. Yeah. So, like I said, at 3 at most, but ideally just 2 people going back and forth, and 2 people that are of similar strength levels. Yeah. So there's not too much going on as far as weight changes in between.
Did you find the higher the level of GPP, the better it carried over to your form because you could replicate it better?
Oh, for sure. Like, because when people are not conditioned, your form starts to break down, so if you're in better condition, you're better able to mimic your technique every single rep of every set. Because what you'll see is, if someone's not conditioned and you're keeping them on a timer, let's say, by the time their last sets come, like the form starts to break down because they're just so fatigued. Whereas someone who is a conditioned athlete, if you watch them, their sets almost get better. So even by the last sets, their sets are better, more explosive than their first sets.
So if we switched from a powerlifter to a CrossFitter, and again, I'll just generalize that maybe powerlifter focuses on strength, CrossFitters on conditioning, how do you rein back in GPP and maybe put more emphasis on strength, or do you? Like, how does it change or differ for a CrossFitter?
For a CrossFit is the sport of GPP. Like, I remember Louis saying that a long time ago when he, first got approached by CrossFit to teach the seminars, and he started watching CrossFit and, attending some of the events. And he was like, this is they're just doing GPP because they're not specialized
Yeah.
at all. Like, I mean, talk about not being specialized. They are trying to be good at every single thing. So that could, that's gymnastics work. That's long endurance.
Hmm.
It's shorter, like metabolic conditioning. But also barbell stuff, in CrossFit, they have to be strong as well because there's plenty of events. There's always going to be events in their CrossFit competitions, even from a low level to a high level, where they have to be maximally strong. So really with CrossFit athletes, there's not a whole lot of difference.
Yeah.
It's just making sure that they incorporate a strength training method that is ideal to get maximally strong. So they're very good at doing dynamic effort work because they're so used to that level of
Yeah.
conditioning. Is just having the overall like posterior chain strength to be able to maintain technique. It wouldn't be the conditioning that would break them down. It would be more about the special exercises to help them maintain that level of technique through all the work sets. But yeah, CrossFit athletes incorporating, a strength program is fun,
Yeah.
because they can handle that. If anything, especially on max effort day, you have to get them to slow down. Like they're just ready to go, 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 go. And also for them, it's definitely getting them to not take too many sets because they'll take a million little
Yeah.
sets to get there. But yeah, CrossFit athletes, we've had a lot of experience with working with CrossFit athletes from just the average person that comes into
Yeah.
a CrossFit class to the highest level games competitor with doing the conjugate system with really good success because it just makes sense because like I said, the conjugate system is like a full system of GPP where they're so used to doing that, so it's a great like blend of the two.
I imagine too, as a coach, it gives you so much feedback in a short space of time. So every week, you know how strong, where they're weak at, where they're conditioning at, and
Right.
you can adapt and pivot on a
Oh,
dime.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And you can do a lot of different things. I have them do where CrossFits try to, or power lifters get kind of, so focused on being specialized in like, I only do conventional or I only do sumo, where CrossFit athletes, they're down for anything. I
Yeah.
can do 1 week are doing sumo, 1 week are doing conventional. And, they just get better from doing everything.
Did you find across the board any unique weaknesses or imbalances for CrossFitters, even though they're so generally strong? Was there anything that was surprising to you working with them?
Mostly, I mean, a lot of posterior chain,
Yeah.
spinal erectors, glutes, and hamstrings, because so much of what they do is quad dominant, wall balls, overhead squats, front squats, you know, um, everything like that. So, like, trying to get their hamstring strength up and, doing good mornings for spinal erectors and things. They're great. Their upper backs are super strong because
Yeah.
they do a lot of pulling stuff, pull ups and ring muscle ups, things, they have great upper back strength, but mainly developing their posterior chain, glutes and hamstrings, especially.
Did you have a hard time initially getting them to buy in how you train athletes, or was it just a natural progression for them?
It is hard because I mean they definitely like since they do so much Olympic lifting, they're so used to like volume, so volume percentages, reps, things like that. So they automatically think like, well, if I want a front squat or back squat, it should just be reps and percentages and whatnot. So it's hard to get them to look at a wide stance box squat, and say like this is going to benefit you as well. But having the CrossFit gym where we would do CrossFit classes and incorporate all of a standard Westside conjugate system. It was pretty cool to see even on the smallest level where just an average person could come in and start to and think like their initial interest was to come in and just do what most people think of CrossFit is just like a WOD where you're just laying on the floor dying
Yeah.
afterwards, basically just a lot of cardio. And then to then eventually being more focused on being interested in maximal strength, now they're caring about what they can deadlift and what they can bench press and whatnot, so I think that it just takes a few people, doing it and seeing the result and it catches on. But I think a lot of people Louis is such a huge figure, even in the CrossFit world, that I think no matter what level, the small or high level, I think people are definitely open to the idea, whether they do a full like traditional conjugate system or there's someone that's like, I'm going to add bands to my squat clean today or whatever, they're doing some aspect of it. I just think that, a lot of them could benefit more from doing, at least adding in a lot of the special exercises for posterior chain would be, incredibly beneficial to being more balanced and not so specialized. Yeah.
Gotcha. When you're training athletes, do you find a big difference from outside of strength gains from a youth athlete to just say an athlete who is more progressed in their career? Would you train them similarly or would you have a different approach?
A younger athlete, like talk about specialization, like, when kids are young, they maybe some parents will get them into a lot of different things. There's a reason behind why people always say like, oh, get your kids, even your young sons, into gymnastics and wrestling and all these things. Even if you want them, if you're really hoping that they're going to be a great football player, they should do other things so that they aren't specialized, because GPP for them is doing a lot of other things, and at that age, super young, it's doing other things, body weight movements, gymnastics, wrestling, grappling, things like that. So from a young age, I'd say more, if I have someone who's younger like that, I would do more things that are to help build their stability and injury prevention. So unilateral work, different things like that, instead of like a higher level athlete where it's like, okay, we're going to do giant camber bar good mornings with bands from the front, all these things, that are a lot, more just at a higher skill level. At a younger athlete, we would do things that are just more to build them to be able to endure training, Yeah.
One of my final questions to wrap up GPP is, with all the different athletes, and we got powerlifters, CrossFitters, and youth, do they have a certain selection of exercises that they keep in reserve and use towards competition because they know, okay, this is going to carry over the best for me? Or especially for CrossFit, does that vary because the games change every year? Like, is there any way that you can go, we know that this will be universally carried over to different exercises?
I mean, no matter if it's CrossFit or powerlifting, that depends on the athlete. Like, because you have certain things like that you find over time that carry over, or that are like your testers and your builders. So I think that's true for any athlete, specifically individually, whether they're a CrossFit athlete or a powerlifter. Powerlifters especially, there's certain things that you just find, you're like, this is an exercise that I know at least will either carry over or show me that I'm getting stronger. So you start to, and that's why like when we get close to, like when we have like meet prep, there's certain exercises that we know, like those are testers, or the builders are the ones that we do prior to meet prep. Everything leading into a competition is like, let's test the strength, focus on special exercises to get stronger. Whereas CrossFit, it's literally, you have to be ready for anything. So you have to keep it very well rounded, like throw all these different things at them and not necessarily say these are the only things that we're going to do. It'd be more in the accessory work, that leading into a competition, that we make sure that everything is well rounded, doing unilateral work, doing hamstring directed work, some level of sled work, some level of GPP that is outside of their realm, is. But like I said, I think it's just more individual, on an individual basis, and figuring out for yourself or for the athlete what are the things that are going to benefit them most outside of peaking time and inside. Yeah.
Anything else you want to cover in GPP?
I think so. I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll move on. We've got a bunch of questions we haven't split up. One are structure questions that we have ourselves, and then one are coming in from fans and followers. One of the first questions I'd like to ask is, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see with the squat?
With the standard squat, like not necessarily a box squat, would be, oh man, it's the pickup. So that's the biggest thing when I see people like your pickup for me, and what I see with other athletes is the way you pick it up is the way you're going to squat it. So there's not for some people. I mean, some people really focus on perfecting their pickup, but for some people, I think they're focused so much on their technique of the squat and not realizing that if you're not, your feet aren't rooted into the ground, if you're not all the way underneath the bar to pick the bar up, if you don't put pressure up into the bar before you pick it up, you're going to pick it up and it should feel, the way you can tell if you picked it up right is the way, how heavy it feels. So even my heaviest squats I ever did, like if I picked it up and it felt easy, or if it felt light, relatively light, then I knew it was going to be a good squat. If I picked it up and it felt really heavy, I knew that I didn't do one of those many aspects right. But for me, what I always thought about was it's like a ritual, coming up to the bar the same way every time. The way you stand up to the bar, up against your chest, you're looking down at your feet and making sure they're in the right spot, rooting them into the ground, making sure they're angled right. And getting under the bar, making sure that your hips are fully under the bar. You're not like tucked with your pelvis under, but your hips are underneath it, but your whole body is underneath the bar. And as you're underneath the bar, putting pressure up into the bar. So you're putting pressure into the bar, almost like you're pulling the slack out of the deadlift. Because a lot of times I'll see people, they'll be going to pick up the bar and there's no pressure at all. And then all of a sudden they jam their upper back into the bar to pick it up, and then it's unstable. They shake a lot. So I think a lot of times when you see people really shaky when they pick the bar up or when they're descending, a lot of times that's just not being really in full contact with the bar and putting that pressure up into the bar, like you're pulling the slack out, but you're pushing the slack out. And then once you're fully engaged with the bar and you feel that weight kind of distributed through your whole body, then you can squeeze really at that point, all you need to do to pick the weight up is to just basically squeeze your glutes, squeeze your quads, and squeeze your hamstrings, and squeeze your knees basically to fully lock out. Is all you really need to do actually to get that bar out of the hooks. So in being fully locked out, when people do sort of that like soft pickup where their knees are still bent, everything's resting on your muscle then. So then you're pre-fatiguing your hamstrings and your quads already. Whereas if you want to be like fully locked out so that you can let that weight settle into your whole body, and it should be resting on your bone structure. So a lot of times when people pick it up and they're not fully locked out, they're in a hurry to get that weight down. That's why I'm a fan of the squat command, because that kind of forces you as a lifter to let the weight settle for a minute. Make sure you're fully stood up, let that weight settle. And, if you feel like you're in your toes when you pick it up, or you're like too far forward or whatever, taking the second to re-rack it and take it again. Cause you want to be, like I said, once you've done all those things that I talked about before, making sure you're fully underneath the bar and you're almost pulling the bar back to the back of the hook so that you're not riding the hook up when you pick it up. You're fully underneath the bar and you pick it straight up and you're already like stabilized in the middle, in your midfoot, basically. So I could really go on and on about the technique of that, but all of that plus the way you brace, basically the air that you take in, not taking a big breath of air. That's one mistake I made early on in my career, and I could see it in the photos because my cheeks are full of air, and that's not really where you want the air. We didn't know much about bracing back then, but making sure that that breath it's not necessarily a big giant breath. It's more of like a calculated breath down into like the lower part of your stomach. You're trying to fill your low back and your stomach with air. So yeah, there's a lot of details about that pickup, but I'd say that that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is the way they pick it up. Because once you have a good pickup and you're set in the right spot, everything about the squat, you just have a lot better chance of being successful with the squat, and then initiating that squat by pushing your butt back and then pushing your hips open, knees out, and pushing the floor apart to descend.
So it's a good rule of thumb. If you start messed up, your squat's going to be messed up.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Focus on the pickup, perfect the pickup, and your dynamic effort days, all those reps, that's a great day to practice that. Like the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. So on dynamic day, making sure that every single set that you do, even when you're fatigued, especially when you're fatigued, is having a perfect pickup. That way, you're not only thinking about that on your heavier days.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you see people with resistance bands?
Mainly, well, number one, picking the wrong like percentage of tension, depending, everybody is different. Like, so that's the other thing. The mistake people make is the way they set them up. So every setup is different. You might have a monolift for one person. You might have a power rack for another person. So I'll have athletes ask me like, how much band should I use? And I'm like, well, what's the way you're setting them up? Like,
Yeah.
you're going to have to like take a second and figure out like whether it's like a luggage scale, or literally standing on a scale or setting up a scale. But I think a luggage scale is a pretty standard kind of easy way to figure that out, and figure out with your setup, how much tension is for each band and whether you're doing bench press or squat or deadlift. So picking the right band tension too. So figuring out how you're setting up your bands and what those tensions are, and then picking the right amount of tension. So sometimes I'll see people maybe doing like speed bench if they're like a 225 bencher and they're using doubled monster mini bands like for speed work. It's a bit much,
Yeah.
just because, for most power racks doing a doubled band, monster mini band is probably about 110 pounds of band tension. And so if we're trying to stay in the 25-ish%, a lot of times, whether it's dynamic or max effort, we try to stick around 25% accommodating resistance. If it's just a regular training day and we're not talking about like Circa Max or strength speed or anything like that, around 25%. So getting those band tensions set and figured out depending on how you're setting them up, and then using the correct amount of band tension.
Do you ever find that some people are not strong enough to get the benefit out of bands when they first start?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if someone like just all out strength, like, if someone can't squat 100 pounds, it's gonna be hard to figure out what 25 pounds of band tension is. So really doing more of straight weight work with that athlete is beneficial before moving into bands. So sometimes, they're just like literally not strong enough to handle the 25%. There's not a small enough band for it. So, or someone might have a decent amount of strength, but just no stability,
Yeah.
so working on stability, like through a lot of times, they're going to get that corrected through special exercises. But, and then until that point, just working on, just straight weight, like you can still do box squats and things like that, but without accommodating resistance. But, a lot of times for them, chains would be a little bit better. So they're not having that overspeed eccentrics and that the band tension pulling them down at such a fast rate of speed. So chains might be a better option for them.
Another common question we get is that people seem to take the percentages as gospel.
Yeah.
From your point of view, is there a fluctuation that you aim for 25%, but if it's above or below by a certain amount, it's not critical?
Right. Yeah. If anything, like sometimes like they might, well, my max squat is 400, but this band is this much and this band is that much, and I'm right in the middle. What should I do?
Yeah.
I would just err on the lighter side unless you're a more advanced athlete and they can handle 5% more band tension to go up. Then I would just say like just err on the lighter side, focus on speed, but it doesn't have to be like I know what you mean. Like there's some people that are like, oh my gosh, I'm like right in the middle of these two tensions. What should I do? Just err on the lighter side. Like I said, unless you're like an advanced athlete that can handle going up a little bit.
There was a question in the squat I forgot to ask, and it's what to focus on if you have trouble getting out of the bottom of the squat. I know it's hard because
Right.
it's a
It
general
could be
question.
technique. Like
Yeah.
it could be technique, but it also would be, that's out of the bottom of squat. A lot of that is abs. So when you're coming, just like at the bottom of a deadlift, usually when someone's having trouble at the bottom of something like that, it's like, I'll series of questions. I'll ask them, well, what ab work do you do? And most of the time they look at me and they kind of look down like, oh my, like not much is what
Yeah.
they typically say. So that's usually the number one thing, is that they don't do much ab work, or they might just get stuck, in the habit of doing one easy ab exercise, like where it might just be like, I just go over to a band and do some crunches. And it's like, okay, well, there's the problem. So that's why, like, usually when I lay out a program for people, I try to keep it structured where we have one day that's like heavy low rep ab work. So, I mean, Louis always preached that a lot. It was just heavy ab work, whether it's on the decline or standing, something that's heavy in the low rep range. Those are like intense, heavy ab movements, and then a day for obliques. Going hard on obliques, not just like kind of going through the motions, and a lot of variety of exercises, not just a standard like maybe just a dumbbell side bend, but a lot of different variety of oblique work and static ab work, plank variations, holds, different things like that for static ab work, and then a day for like your typical like repetition ab stuff, whether it's a band or cable crunches or V-ups. I a ton of different variety of ab work. So I try to like keep it organized like that so that nothing's getting neglected. But that's assuming that someone's doing it, because usually people get to the end of the workout and that's like, you kind of get to that point and you're like, oh, I don't feel like doing it, or maybe I'll do it later, and it just doesn't get done. So I would say a lot of times that people have a problem at the bottom, they're neglecting ab work. They're not doing any form of like good morning. Those are the two biggest things. We could break it down into like technique. Maybe they're in a bad position at the bottom, or maybe they do no hamstring work. They're just relying on their quads to get out of the bottom. So that it kind of depends too if they're a raw lifter or an equipped lifter. But I just, without knowing either one, I would say focus on heavy ab work and heavy good mornings.
The next one is a touchy one, and it's box squats and no box squats, regular squats. Do you have a ratio you do, especially with people starting off? Because I think this is what confuses a lot of people who watch Lou, read our books, in that a lot of the time he refers to people who are pretty accomplished. But what is your ratio with people who come in the door? Do you solely do box squats or do you mix it up?
I mix it up. But I do start them a lot with box squats because it's safer in the beginning because it's controlled. It's, I can control the depth at which they're going. We can focus. It's a focus more on building their posterior chain, which will help them into squat, but it's not working their technique of the squat, So even at a higher level with athletes that I work with, it's more of like 50-50. We always box squat on dynamic effort days. But on max effort days, I do have athletes kind of do pretty much, if it's off season, a blend of like kind of 50-50 of a box squat or a variation or a free squat variation, because, you just need to practice your technique. It was something that I really needed when I was competing, was that technique with the free squat. Because for me, technique was everything. So, and I think it's just something that that people need more of is technique work without doing too much, but with a newer athlete, a lot of times I'll get them started on the ATP, like belt squat, box squats, or belt squat, free squats, because it's a good way to work on their technique without having the added pressure of having the bar on their back. And so they have a million things to think about. Like, let's just work on the technique of the squat before we add a bar to your back. So there's kind of a progression that I like that way, is to start them on the belt squat, box squat or free squat, into then doing more of, then I like to use a safety squat bar, because having the straight bar on their back to do the box squat is, you got to think about the upper back and stuff, where you still have to in the safety squat bar, but it's a little less to think about. But I have them do a lot of box squats just to build their foundation before getting ready to squat, to make sure that, because if I just threw them into like free squats, narrow stance, a lot of times their knees are buckling in, because they just don't have that strength. So more, I would say it's probably 75% or more box squats for a newer athlete. And I guess even for a higher level athlete too, if we're doing only box squats on dynamic effort day. Yeah.
There's still an importance to bring in full squats.
Oh, for sure. I mean, a lot of time to make sure that you're working on that technique, working on the pickup with a straight bar, and doing, not to say you couldn't do free squats with specialty bars, but working on that technique in your typical like competition stance.
Okay. We're going to move on to social media questions, so they're all over. And at the start, I am not going to call out people's Instagram handles because
It's probably too hard to read
I,
some of
yeah,
them. Yeah.
yeah, I'll struggle regardless. Um, some of these are going to be hard to answer, Laura, but we'll
I'll try.
blast
I'll
through 'em.
try.
The first one is, what is the last thought before taking out a record-breaking squat?
When I was competing, I definitely was kind of known for like, some people are like real intense, like for in between every single attempt, or they're listening to music or whatever. But I was more of like, I needed to be more like calm and lighthearted. So I was always like talking to people and, um, almost like trying not to focus on it, until it was time, like until my name was called, until I started getting my knees wrapped, then I started, the kind of switch was flipped. But I was more about thinking about all the cues, like the way I was going to pick it up, like thinking about the different cues and how I was going to execute the lift. And then just thinking about like what depending if it was like I think that question was like what the record breaking squat, so obviously it was important to me, so it
Yeah,
was like thinking about like how this was going to change the day or change my life, and to me, like I like pressure, so I thrive off that, so I kind of like put the pressure on myself a little bit about like what that was going to mean, to make that lift and how important it was to execute every little thing perfectly. So it was more about just thinking about everything that I needed to do just right. Or if there was something that was leading up to that day that I had been kind of messing up on or whatever, if I was struggling on in training, thinking about that one little thing as much as I could. But for the most part, I tried to just not think about anything, stay lighthearted, laugh with people and whatnot. And then as soon as the knee started to get wrapped, it was go over everything and just feed off the energy of the crowd. I loved that. I loved, just like when I was bodybuilding, I hated all the everything leading up to it, the diet and everything, but just to be in front of a crowd, and which is weird because I'm not really like a people person,
yeah,
believe it or not, but like I loved feeling that energy of people watching and like knowing that they wanted to see me do something good. Like I try to tell people all the time, like newer athletes that are going to do their first meet and they're, worried about the crowd watching them. Like, but you don't realize that that crowd is, they're cheering for you. They want to see you do something that's really cool that they probably don't do. So that kind of helped me out a lot. That's kind of what I would be thinking.
when you first began powerlifting, did you ever imagine that you'd squat 775?
Absolutely not. I mean, I remember going when when I was thinking about starting to power lift and I went to the Arnold Classic and I saw Amy Weisberger squat, I think like 534 or something like that, somewhere around there. I could not wrap my head around a female being able to do that. Like, I was just like, that is unreal. So I never imagined that I would do that. I was just getting into powerlifting and I, probably at that point, let's see, that was in March. I probably had just started getting like briefs and stuff like that because that's just kind of what everybody did, was you just get all the gear back then. So, yeah, I had no idea that I'd be able to do that. Amy was the first person I saw do that. And then my first meet that I ever did, Becca Swanson was there and squatted like probably 7 something. And so, and then it started to become like, okay, this is something that people do, that women are capable of doing. And I was starting to pick up powerlifting really well. So, the seed was planted, but I still, definitely wasn't sure if I'd be someone that would be able to do that.
Did you realize how much of an impact that you would be making for female powerlifting when you were lifting the weights you did? Or were you kind of not paying attention to that and reflected on it afterwards?
I didn't really realize then because there were so few women powerlifting, like overall in general, there were so few. So I wasn't sure if it was going to stay that way, become less. I mean, hopefully more. I don't think I really realized that until I think the first time I hosted the Women's Pro-Am in 2012 and how many women came. I was like, I was so used to like, if I did a meet, I'd be like one of maybe the only one or maybe a couple women that did a meet. But then when we had the women's pro-am and there was 43 girls, I think, that signed up for it, I was just like, this is really cool and something that I want to keep doing. And then like my own training group started to grow with like different women, and women were moving to Cincinnati to train in the training group. So it was just like, that's, again, that was again in like 2012, 2013. So then that's just kind of where my focus started going, without even, it's not that I didn't intend for that, but it just naturally went in that direction. And then, by the time 2014 came, at the end of 2014, I had done the York Pro Invitational, or the Westside Invitational. And I was like, this is what I need to focus on right now. There's women that I'm helping who are getting really strong, and I'm enjoying seeing them have success just as much as if it was myself. And then it just kind of like just organically happened that way, to where it was just like, what I am doing on the platform is then attracting more women to powerlifting and being stronger, and it's growing, and people are wanting to do these things. And the things that Amy and Becca had done for me as far as setting that example, I was hearing from other women that I was doing that for them. And I was like, that was kind of cool, because that was, what was kind of paved the way for me. So, that just kind of became my focus and my passion. And even now to this day, with like coaching athletes, like remotely or in person, I just have so many more women than I do men. I think that's just, by chance and by coincidence and by just kind of what I've fostered and what I like to do. So,
what were your initial motivating factors, I'd imagine, for getting the powerlifting, and what do you want to be remembered for?
My motivating factors, especially getting into powerlifting, were that I wanted to be stronger. I love that feeling of being strong, and like as strong as I personally could be. And then once I started looking at what the world records were in my weight class, and starting to realize like that, like if they could do it, there's no reason why I couldn't try to do this. My motivating factors at that time were to be the best in the world. And I had never felt that way about anything else. I, grew up doing gymnastics, and I, ran track and played some soccer, and got into running in college. And I never had that feeling of anything I did where I was just like, I literally want to be not only the best that I can be, but best in the world. So that was my driving factor, was to do whatever it took to be the best in the world. And I, like I said, had never felt that way before. So that was everything that I wanted to do, and just set an example, and be a part of this niche group, that I finally felt like I was, a part of.
What makes you feel strong? Define it however you like.
Well, obviously being physically strong, like when I was, competing. Now I, obviously I'm not competing, and maybe I'm not what I would consider strong, but physically strong. But also, like, what makes me feel strong is, being, even in my life right now, obviously I'm not trying to be a power lifter anymore, but I still train that way. But just being disciplined and accomplishing something for myself, so, my challenges nowadays are totally different than when I was powerlifting and trying to break a world record. Right now I'm, like, I set a goal to run 1,000 miles this year. And, I'm already at 800. Wow. So it's like little things like that make me feel strong. 'Cause, that to somebody else is super easy, other people that, actually run. But for me, it just keeps me in line. It keeps me, doing something and striving towards something. So setting these goals and these challenges, I'm constantly doing that. Like sometimes it's just monthly. It's like, okay, every day this month I'm going to do, last year it was, I'm just going to run a mile every day in this 1 month. And so that kind of what sparked it. And what's cool about that is, kind of, I used to run before I did powerlifting. So I'm kind of going back to that, but as a totally different athlete, having done this style of training. I did a half marathon earlier this year and felt like completely different than when I did it 20 years ago,
Yeah.
just because of the way I train now, and keeping strength training in. And I did no strength training when I was in my early 20s when I was running, so yeah, for me, what makes me feel strong is setting goals for myself, particularly physically, I mean, mentally too, or whatever. But when we talk about like strong, it's like setting these goals for myself that, um, that are completely different than powerlifting, but still keep me accountable and keep me disciplined, and setting a positive example for athletes that I train.
I have to ask about the half marathon. How was your time compared to your previous time?
I don't, I wish I mean, I don't know how much record they kept of that back then, but I don't know. I don't think it was that much more, if it was more, because I did it in 2 hours, and I'm like, I don't think I was that, like, I don't think I was faster back then. Like, so, I'm 42 now, and I think running the same as if I was in my early 20s, and
And
feeling a lot better afterwards. Like, I recovered a lot better afterwards.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
What advice can you give women who think they shouldn't lift?
Sadly, I mean, I rarely come across women that say that anymore, just because it's become so much more mainstream to lift, even if, because even like these other forms of, kind of fad training styles or facilities that open up, that with different, like training styles or whatever, even if it's cardio based, they're somehow still incorporating some like lifting to it, which is pretty cool. So I think nowadays it's a lot different. Women are seeing it a lot differently, and they're wanting to do it. I rarely, like I said, come across someone who is like, I don't want to lift, so, really, they're probably interested in something else. And even if they're interested in something cardio based, just having a conversation with them about, the science behind strength training and what it can do to actually make them a better, if they're a marathon runner or something like that, and how it can actually make them better. And just even if they're not interested in like, doing something else like cardio based, just for life in general, just
Hmm.
the longevity aspect of strength training, and how it can, I mean, not that it's going to like make you, I don't know that it's going to make you live 10 years longer, but if it can improve your quality of life when you're older, just by being stronger, a lot of times too, that, that's enough to kind of at least make them see it differently, is just the functionality of strength training. And also, hopefully we're starting to get past the idea that women might have, that they're going to get bulky if they lift weights. It's a complete myth. Really have to like put a lot of effort into getting bulky, whether with your training and with nutrition.
Yeah.
So, we're kind of like, I think we're almost past that point that women are, nervous to strength train or get bulky.
Um, do you still come across any kind of, I want to say pseudoscience, because it was in the mainstream for so long, when it comes to female training, that you have to constantly know that's not correct? Is there anything that still comes up today, or is pretty much everyone is a lot better informed?
I think a lot of people are a lot better informed. Just like I said, based in CrossFit helped that a lot. I kind of credit CrossFit a lot for, you know, just exposing that to so many people. And, now, like I said, all these other forms of whatever type of training that have come along. And, them incorporating strength training, I think we're, like I said, at that point where it's just not really
Yeah.
a question anymore. Yeah.
Um, what are some of your favorite books applicable to lifting?
Well, usually, like, if I'm trying to like, if I have like, let's say a client or something like that wants to learn more, I automatically just direct them towards, the Book of Methods, and any of the like specialized book that Louis has written, just because he's taken all of, the really sciencey books that like super training or science of sports training, like that I wouldn't really like tell, because they're probably going to read that and they're going to look at that and be like,
Yeah.
but to most people, Louis written a lot of the books, especially like the book of methods, that help people. Cause I'll have clients that'll, I'm programming conjugate stuff for them, but they want to understand it a lot, better. So I usually direct them towards any of Louis' books. If it's an athlete that I have, maybe like one of the jumping books, but definitely any of Louis' books, because he's taken all of that knowledge that he's gained and everything he's read and put it into the terms that we want to hear. The way we train, because it can be really hard to read all the different, like I said, super training and books and stuff like that, and say like, what do I do with this information? So he's taken all that information and said, here's what you do with that.
Awesome. And the follow on, what's some of the best advice you got from Louis?
Louis, like, definitely, like, it was mostly when I would have like hard times, like when I had a year or several meets in a row where I bombed out. It's a lot of times people that like weren't around during that time and know me now don't realize like how many times, I had meets like that, for whatever reason, and how he would, I remember after one of the meets, I thought for sure, I was like, I'm going to get kicked out. Like, there's no way that he's going to let me keep training here if I keep bombing out. But it wasn't like that. Like, I think a lot of people might feel like that he is that way. Like, if you're not producing, then you're out of here. But he also knows people's potential, and, and so I remember he told me like that he had, I think, 11 bomb outs in a row or something like that. But then one day it just like clicked, and, things just kind of came back around. Sometimes you just have a, kind of a slump like that. And obviously I don't want to, like, even with my own athletes, like, they rarely do bomb out, because we learn so much more, we know a lot more now. But it can happen. We don't want it to like, we don't want to like justify that happening, but it can happen. But like, just his compassion and his like encouragement, to that things happen like that, and just to stay with it. And, I never wanted to be that person, like he would say, that was just like a flash in the pan, like the brightest stars burn out the fastest. I was like, I could have easily just said, you know what, like, this is, I'm done with this, because that was in 2007, I think. So I was only 2 years into powerlifting. So I could have easily just been like, just given up. But he was very much about like, this is not like a quick sport. Like, this is, to him, it was lifelong, so he really just, preached that these are the things that are going to happen. It's not linear. It's going to be up and down. And, you just have to stay with it. So I think I really took that with me, because with athletes that I coach now, it's, when I see that and they get frustrated and they get upset and stuff like that, and it's just like you just want to tell them like, everything is going to be okay. You don't really know how to explain that. Like this is why it's going to be okay, and this is what we're going to do. Sometimes you just have to keep pushing through, just keep pushing through that, because it's going to come back around.
When your bench progress slowed, what did you do to get the heaviest all-time benches?
I totally remember when it slowed, because I was really stuck like around the mid 400 range, even though I knew, just based on certain movements I would do, like, or whatever, like, that I was capable of a 500-pound bench, but it just like wasn't happening. So, had to just really start overloading. So, a lot of times, and this isn't a bench press shirt. So I know some people are like, oh no, you should only bench straight weight and only bench to your chest and whatnot. Like, I definitely would bench to my chest a lot in a shirt. But for me, what helped me was I wanted to be able to take that weight out and feel like it was light, because in a bench press shirt, especially, like, a lot of times you're handling weights that are, a couple 100 pounds more than what you can do without the bench press shirt. So just like the start of the squat, like how it has to be perfect. So you want to pick that weight up and feel like it's light. Well, I want to take the bar out on the bench press and feel like it's light. So overloading for me was huge. So doing a lot of movements that were, partial range of motion, but were super heavy in band tension. or with chain weight was what helped me. Like I was doing weights that were at the top end 650 pounds, so then when I took out 500, I remember when I took out 500 at the first time, after doing all that, when I took out 500 at the meet, once I took it out, I knew I was going to get it because
Yeah.
it's just the way it felt in my hands. Not to mention the fact that when you're overloading, like with accommodating resistance, I'm building my triceps. So the bench press shirt, given that you're wearing it correctly and getting the most, and it's tight enough, you're getting a lot out of the bottom. But once you get to a certain point, it's a lot of you. Like it's you having to lock that weight out. So it was just like, how can I improve that? And that was to just overload and get my triceps as strong as possible. So different variations to 2 or 1 board, but with a lot of heavy band tension or a lot of chain weight is what changed for me.
How many conjugate sessions a week for competitive CrossFitters?
I still have them do 4, so a max effort day, a dynamic effort day for both upper and lower. But that's not to say you can't get creative depending on like what they need. Sometimes it might be like an overhead movement, or a movement that, it might be their max effort movement might be like a squat clean or something like that. So it doesn't have to be like, let's do all the, heavy deadlift, heavy squat, squat, deadlift on dynamic day, plus all of your volume and Olympic lifts, that they're doing aside from that. Sometimes you can incorporate that in just so that it's not too much additional work. So it's still doing the principles of the conjugate system, but maybe applying the movements differently depending on what they need, and just being creative with those movements. But I still have them do 4 days of conjugate.
What got you into lifting?
Bodybuilding. So that was like my segue into powerlifting was bodybuilding. And I trained at a powerhouse gym in Toledo, and there were a couple of powerlifters that trained there and who suggested doing like a non-sanctioned meet. Those were like really popular back then, like push pull. And so that was kind of my first exposure to powerlifting, was doing a couple of those non-sanctioned meets, and that's where I met Jason Fry. He lived in that Northwest Ohio area, and so I met him there, and he was wearing a bench press shirt, and so I started like kind of learning about it, and then picked up Louis' VHS tapes and started watching those, and then decided to pick out. I was like, well, maybe I should do like a real powerlifting meet, and so picked out a real powerlifting meet and got with some world champion powerlifters up in Detroit and started training with them. It was just like the perfect storm. I really had the best like intro into powerlifting because those guys had been around forever, and they gave like one guy gave me his squat suit and it fit perfectly. And, so it was just like I had like all the right tools like immediately. And I realized, and this is back then. I mean, nowadays when there's so many, so much more access to powerlifting gyms and stuff like that, that people still have a hard time if they want to get into equipped powerlifting. They still have a hard time accessing that because there might not be equipped powerlifters in their area. So we're trying to that's in addition to promoting women's powerlifting, promoting equipped lifting and getting more people knowledgeable about that so that people do have access to it if they want to get into it, and they're not like hitting this barrier of I can't get into it because I literally have nobody to help me because there's nobody that knows anything about it near me. So
How do you think the strength world perceive you being a world champion female powerlifter?
I think I've really been met with a lot of respect. I can't recall other than like, people I remember on YouTube commenting back in the day, like dumb things, as far as like a woman in powerlifting. Of course, there's just people that have no clue about it that just want to say, oh, like she must be a man or something like, just dumb things like that. But I think over time, more so like in the last 10 years, it's just become more accepted and people just know more about it because they're just seeing more. Social media is bad for a lot of things, but it's good for, exposing people to stuff like that. So now, it's more of a that's awesome type of thing instead of being like, why would you want to do that? Do you, does your back hurt? You're not going to be able to walk when you're 50
Yeah.
type of thing. Now it's like, no, this is good. Like strength training is good. It's actually good for you. So things have changed a lot.
Were you treated differently being a woman at Westside surrounded by mostly males?
My experience was not. It was good. I had a great experience, and with all the guys at Westside, and so my experience was good. I know, I trained with Karen Sizemore a little bit later, and she told me about some crazy stories, but that's Karen. We know
Yeah.
Karen, but my experience was really good, and I always was treated really well, like taken care of really well, and I would try to work in and train with the guys as much as I could if it made sense as far as the
Yeah.
strength levels. But no, I had great experiences.
Well, that's all we got.
Yeah, awesome.
To wrap up, is there any upcoming seminars or anything you're going to be doing?
I am in September. So September 17th, I will be in Roy, Utah, which is near Salt Lake City. And then the next day, September 18th, I'll be in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'll be out west then. And I'm trying to plan a seminar at Tiger Fitness. So in Cincinnati at the gym that I coach at in October. So I'll be looking for that, like probably October 22nd. I'm excited about like finally doing one in Cincinnati, like so that I can, it's in my home gym and I've got everything that we need, and just try to make that as big as possible. So those are kind of the things I got coming up. We've got the North of the Border happening, the powerlifting meet that we're hosting November 19th. So that's kind of it for the rest of the year. Those are the only like seminars, things that I have coming up. But on my website, queenbeepower.com, that's where like you'll see seminars posted and all that information on my website.
And if they want to come check out the gym, should they get in contact with you? Or is there a
Yeah,
website?
I mean, they can come, like I said, Monday through Friday, 8 to 6. It's a public gym. They can come at any time. But if they want to, if I'm only there like certain times of the day, morning or afternoon. So I would love to meet people that want to come in, so they can absolutely get a hold of me and let me know when they want to stop by.
Awesome. Laura,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.